thank you all very much for taking time to join us today. It promises to be a really interesting discussion and a very, very salient one. I'm Henrietta Jackson-Stops and I run IPOS Mediation alongside my own practice as a mediator. For those of you who don't know us, we're an established provider of dispute resolution services, having been providing mediators to law firms, corporates and individuals for over 25 years. I believe we've mediated around 20,000 disputes in that time. Our handpicked group of experienced mediators deliver unparalleled quality and knowledge, and many are recognised in Legal 500 and chambers. We mediate across a broad range of disputes, commercial, workplace and employment, public sector and family business and trusts. There aren't many disputes that we haven't handled or come across. But today we're talking about mental health in the workplace and how business can address the challenge that is causing 1 in 6 workers to experience mental health issues at any one time, and with the cost to businesses reaching £45 billion each year. These were figures before a global pandemic, and now nearly 2/3 of all workers believe that COVID has had a negative impact on their mental health and well-being. What has been the effect of this uncertainty and changes that we have all experienced on our mental health, and how can businesses support mental health in the workplace? Luckily, I have an expert panel here today to help me answer those questions. Starting with the Lord Mayor of the City of London, William Russell. As Lord Mayor, William is an international ambassador for the UK's financial and professional services sector. He also heads the City of London Corporation, which supports businesses and community within the city. William has a particular interest in mental health. He's a deputy chair of Place to Be, which supports mental health within schools, and has chosen to support mental health initiatives as part of his Lord Mayor's appeal. A Lord Mayor's diary is frankly crazy, so I'm particularly grateful to William for his time. Dr. Lynda Shaw has a background in neuroscience and psychology and is described as a change specialist, just who we've all needed in the past 18 months. She advises businesses and individuals on how to embrace change and to use it to regain momentum and new energy. I, for one, am fascinated to hear about the neuroscience behind change. Susan Bright is the Global Managing Partner for Diversity and Inclusion and Responsible Business at Hogan Lovells, and is responsible, among many other strands, in leading their efforts on well-being. She has been described by Legal Business as one of the 50 most influential women in law, and it's clear that she's using that influence in really positive ways, as she's also a non-exec director of the City Mental Health Alliance. And last but by no means least, David Evans is a mediator with us here at IPOS. David's background is at the sharp end in a range of workplace and commercial environments. He's been a company director, an HR director, and transformation consultant, among other roles. So he really understands the issues that HR and businesses can face, and now spends his time specialising in resolving disputes where the parties need to re-establish and maintain their working relationships. But now to get on with the discussion. We're going to start with the Lord Mayor, as he only has 45 minutes with us today, and then we'll hear from the other panellists. Please do put any questions you want to ask in the Q&A, and we will answer them as we go along or at the end. Lord Mayor, over to you.
Thank you, Hetty, and lovely to see everyone. And I'm very pleased to be here with you all to talk about mental health. And as we've seen coming off the back of the pandemic, the Mental Health Foundation has stated that most of us have been feeling more anxious. The young, women, people with mental health conditions were hit hard. And as we come out of lockdown, it's important not to leave people behind. So one of the things that also Rachel Lord, who's the CEO of BlackRock, who has actually just moved to Hong Kong, but one of the things she said about 6 months ago is that mental health has hit, this is a seismic change in the attitude to mental health. And COVID-19, I'm one of those people that out of tragedy, there are sometimes positives. And I've always been wanting to lift the stigma of mental health. And I think what's happened quite a lot around the pandemic is that mental health is something that the corporates were focusing on, but now they really have realized that they have to focus on it even more. And one of the things I've been pushing for, and for those who are listening, I would urge, is rather like a board agenda item. You have ESG. Many boards are now beginning to have mental health / well-being as a board agenda item. And I would encourage everyone to think about that because to me, it is absolutely critical. And what we've been doing here with the Lord Mayor's appeal and the mental health, around mental health, is we've had 5 years of something called This Is Me campaign, which is doing very well. And a lot of companies have joined. PwC, I will say, have been particularly good at making videos internally of people who want to talk about their mental health. And the more people can talk, I've always said, communication is the key to so many things in life. And one of the things about Place to Be, it's around early intervention. And early intervention solves many problems. And a lot of the problems we have in our schools is the background of where some of the children have come from and what they're seeing at home has caused huge mental health issues. And that's where the counselling has worked so well. And funny enough, just yesterday, talking about mental health, we had a whole day around returning citizens. And if you look at the figures on those people who go to prison, most of them are there because of what's happened to the circumstances in their life rather than actually being bad people. And a lot of them have had mental health problems. And the more we can do, the better. And so that storytelling, This Is Me storytelling, has really helped employees share their experiences. And people have said, well, if they can do it, as you know, I can do it. And then there's well-being in their workplace. All the data says if you keep healthy and well, it helps your mental health a great deal. And the final thing we've done is the Green Ribbon campaign, which is around Mental Health Week, where everyone wears a green ribbon. So, look, my view is very much that the more we can talk about it, the more we can get people involved and get organisations involved, the better it will be, not only for the employees but for the companies. It's a bit like diversity and inclusion. All the data says that if you have a diverse and inclusive workforce, the results are better. And we all know that if you have a workforce that is able to cope with mental health or have things in place to help cope with mental health, then it is better for the individuals as well as the company. The final thing I would say is that, I've talked about women, and one of the biggest, as we know, killers of men, in fact, the largest killers of men under the age of 40, sadly, is suicide. And that is, there are ways to prevent that. And I'm convinced a lot of that is very simple, is communicating and talking and trying to help those. And so the more the big companies can focus on that mental health agenda, the better will be. So those are the words I would say, Hetty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that is a call to action to all those businesses listening. So thank you. But I think before we look at what we can do in the workplace, the practical strategies, we might take a step back and ask Lynda, why has the mental health crisis increased? What has the pandemic done that has made the crisis worse, and the changes and uncertainties that we have all faced? So Lynda, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Hetty. Well, to be honest with you, the first thing I want to say is just how well people are doing as well. Because if people are struggling in any shape or form, just getting out of bed is showing strength. Just getting into the workplace is showing strength, and even more so if they're doing their job well. So sometimes people who've got mental health issues and problems, it's not necessarily a sign of weakness at all, it's a sign of strength. So I think we need to recognize this, that people who are struggling are doing extremely well. And I take my hat off to you if you're listening and you're one of those people. Right, okay, so what has the pandemic done to us to make this situation worse? Well, one of the biggest problems that we had, of course, was at the very beginning, massive dose of uncertainty. huge uncertainty, and the brain doesn't do gaps. It doesn't do uncertainty. It fills the gaps in. So it searches and seeks out data. So therefore, at the beginning of the pandemic, people were feverishly looking at the news saying, gimme, 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 you know, I need more information, ringing people on Zoom 12 hours a day to anybody who would understand this technology and work with it. So we were gleaning information to fill those gaps in, so the brain feels in more control. But the trouble is, a lot of that information was misinformation. It was brand new. A lot of it was guessing. A lot of it was people's opinion. A lot of it was not helpful. So we began to worry and feel very stressed out about things that didn't happen. But of course, as we know, things got worse and the pandemic continued. So the very first issue that we have here is this feeling of lack of control. And when we feel there's a lack of control, it's very frightening. So that's one issue, a big issue. The other thing is that as we've moved forward, of course, the stress levels have increased. We normalize stress. We get to this point, we normalize stress, and then we go, okay, fine, I'm all right, I'm okay, I'm handling it. And then we layer another bit, and then we normalize that. Then we layer another bit and we normalize that. And before we know where we are, we're just about peeking over the edge and holding on with our fingernails to make sure that we can actually cope on a daily basis. So again, the stress levels keep rising and rising and rising, which means that we go into overwhelm. And it's not going away. We're hearing now we've got fuel shortages for all sorts of reasons. We've got other things going on that are layering the uncertainty and layering the feeling of being overwhelmed. So how do you know when somebody's overwhelmed? Well, you can tell because they're finding it hard to think logically. They're finding it hard to think clearly. They've got their blinkers on, focusing on the perceived threat. But the trouble is the perceived threat isn't one, it's lots. So the overwhelm is just getting worse and worse and worse. So you'll find lots of people are confused. They're not very good at solving problems. So therefore they're operating very much in their fight or flight response, which means that probably the secretions of cortisol, the stress hormone, are raging heavily, which also means that can affect our physical and mental health even more. So we're in overwhelm, and we've got our blinkers on, problem number 2. The third problem is we are getting stuck in our sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight nervous system. So it's that reflex. So we're now stuck in it, and we are feeding it. So therefore, what we're getting is our digestive system slows down. Our muscles are tense, so we've got a lot of tension going on. And what is even worse is our immune system is suppressed because of it. And of course, now we're still worried about getting the virus. It hasn't gone away, and we're still worried about what is next with it. So we are now in this situation where we are overworking our sympathetic nervous system. Problem number 3. So what can we do? Go back to problem number 1. Our lack of control is to put some deliberate choices in our day to actually get a modicum control back to where we are. Now, how do we do that? Saying no is a really good idea. I have got clients who are responding to emails at 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night. They are not switching off. We need to set some parameters. Just because we're working from home, or indeed as in a sort of a hybrid way, we've got to say no to things and put up those parameters. We won't lose our jobs because of it, and people won't think badly of us. What matters is we take care of our own mental well-being. We can schedule things. You can schedule things like you're working for an hour solidly on a piece of work, then you're going to give yourself 5 minutes off to go for a walk, just a quick walk, run up and down the stairs a few times, anything. Schedule in those things, little bits of me time, so that you feel in control more of what is happening to you. So those little things are helpful because it's important to feel that there's some control going on. So how are we going to get over the overwhelm? Well, as I said before, when you are in high secretions of cortisol, the blinkers go on and you're looking at the perceived threat. The perceived threat at this moment, if you're looking at it like that in the workplace, is not life-threatening. So relax, come off the boil a bit and actually start looking beyond those blinkers and look to see what others are doing. Do they need help? Think of others instead of yourself. Look outwards. Start helping somebody. Ring them. Are you okay? Help a neighbor. All of those things, it helps to feel part of a community and will put our neurochemicals in a much better place, And how do we work with coming out of the sympathetic nervous system and engaging the parasympathetic nervous system? Sleep. Highest priority of all. We need to sleep. Some people wear a badge of honor that, oh, I can survive with 4 to 5 hours sleep a night. There aren't many people who can. We need to prioritize sleep, very much so. When we sleep, we consolidate memories, we consolidate learnings, and we detoxify the brain from the day's waste that we've built up. Sleep is important. And on a daily basis, just some breathing exercises, just count on the breath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however you want, just count on the breath so that you relax and you engage the parasympathetic nervous system more. All of these things, if we don't do this, can lead to anxiety and depression. So it's very sensible to look after ourselves.
Thank you, Lynda. And we've had a comment from one attendee who's saying that they wish they'd heard this from you 6 months ago. But you are giving them great advice now, so thank you very much. I'd like to actually just ask a question about the term mental health and the term well-being, and whether one does mental health have more negative connotations, or is talking in terms of well-being means we're skirting around a harder issue of mental health? Do you have any thoughts on that, Lynda?
It's a really interesting question. And of course, language matters. Language changes our perceptions. So it's very important. We must also remember, excuse me, we must also remember that our perception is unique to only us. So when somebody says to you, oh, I know exactly how you feel. No, they don't. Nobody knows exactly how you feel. Only you know exactly how you feel. All we can ever have is empathy and compassion and try to understand so that you can help. You will not know what it's like to be them. So we've got to think about that. So if our language is skewing our perceptions of what is going on, that is also going to be different for each individual. So we may not have a generic answer to that. However, mental health to me means the absence of mental illness. So if there's an absence of mental illness, it really tells me the more that we are maintaining that mental health. It's what William was talking about, is actually getting these things early and actually putting in place maintenance systems that help us in the sort of things I've already talked about. And then that leads to mental well-being and physical well-being. So it's a tricky one.
Yeah, thank you. And William, do you have hope for the future in your work with children and Place to Be in particular, that the upcoming generation are going to be better tooled up, if that's the way to put it?
And that's definitely our hope, Hetty. And the demand has grown dramatically because, it was, as you know, person to person. So one of the other things about COVID is it's changed through the digitization of the world. Everything's come forward so quickly, which in a way is a positive. I mean, I always say, as you know, I've done 2 years, but I've probably reached more people as Lord Mayor than any other Lord Mayor because of Zoom and Teams, which I always admit I'd never heard of Zoom or Teams really until March 2020. And I'm one of, millions of people so on that front. But so, yes, I think it does. I mean, but I think also I think we need to, I'm interested to hear what the panel thinks, but for me, I don't see how people are allowed to write things on Twitter or social media anonymously. To me, that I just don't understand that. And you're, more the lawyers than me. But to me, I can't understand why government can't say it is illegal to put a comment anonymously, because people are able to write things that are truly, truly hurtful. And then we can't stop people putting pictures of themselves. I have a young 19-year-old daughter, and you can just see that what social media has done for mental health. So I do believe that, yes, we're preparing them better. Yes, it's early intervention. And the digitization of that means that Place to Be is reaching more children. So we hope we're making a bigger difference. And mental health has come to the fore much more because of what's gone on with COVID. So they're all positives, but you could argue the demand continues to grow. In a way, if the stigma is lifted, the demand's going to be greater because people are prepared to talk about it. And as you know, and I talk about my personal experiences, look, I was sent away to a prep school age 9 in Sussex. Sexual abuse was rife, and there's a whole generation of us who kept quiet about it. And as all the experts know, mental health goes to the back of your brain and you just somehow get on with it. And then suddenly something happens and it all comes forward, and it could be 10, 15 years later, and then you have to talk about it. So yeah, I mean, I think we are preparing them, but then we've got the other things that are happening to make it, you know, suddenly more people have got mental health issues because they're prepared to talk about them.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you on that, and totally agree with your views on social media. Susan, you're at the coalface of implementing strategies and discussing this in the workplace in a big city law firm. Does Lynda's analysis resonate with you? Does it accord with what you're seeing in relation to your own employees?
Yes, it does, and the you know, real practical ways of thinking about looking after your own well-being really resonate. So and very helpful. And thinking about it from a business context, you know, what we're after is creating, you know, a workplace where people can thrive, and there's a real evidence that businesses who embed, I'll talk about well-being, language does matter, we can come back to that, but businesses that embed well-being really do thrive and are more profitable, more successful, places where people want to work. And it is really critical. You know, as a law firm, we are just our people. That is what we are. And in order for people to perform at their best in challenging, sometimes work environment, advising clients on really stressful and difficult issues, it's really important that people are able to perform well, potentially over very long careers. And equally, thinking about it from a business perspective, if people aren't able to do that, then there's a risk. There's a human risk. There's also potentially a risk to the business. People, if they're not well, may not be coping so well, maybe take action that ultimately is negligent, may ultimately need to take time out to get better. So the things from a business perspective, I think a lot of businesses are good at having the tools when there's a real issue, when somebody becomes unwell. So if they're unwell, or even if in distress, and they have those things in place. But what I think is really interesting and hard is this piece around creating a thriving workplace where people are mentally, physically well and able to perform at their best. And so thinking about that, it's, you know, we think about it around creating that culture, and then developing a healthy working environment. And it is thinking about how you deal with the sorts of issues that Lynda's raising about having good working conditions, making sure people are able to be in teams where you're not, you know, on all of the time, you can cover for each other and so forth. And then signposting people to the tools and so on to help help yourself to keep healthy. But the really a key thing is about creating a culture where you can talk. I mean, we've been involved in the This Is Me campaign, and it is really powerful storytelling where individuals are able to say, look, you know, this is me, this is what I've been through, and this is how I have dealt with it. Because at the end of the day, we've all got mental health, all of us, and sometimes we're more healthy, less healthy, sometimes we're thriving, sometimes we're not. And it's learning individually how to manage your own or my own mental well-being that is so important. So businesses have a huge amount to do in this space. It's not easy. It's really not easy. But the really amazing thing over the last, I would say, 8 years is the fact that lots of businesses are taking this seriously, are talking about it. You mentioned at the beginning that I'm on the board of the City Mental Health Alliance. I have found that sort of environment fantastic for business leaders to share experience and learnings from each other. So we're in a very different place, I think, than we were eight or more years ago, where I don't think you'd even have this sort of conversation.
Really interesting. Is it an item on your board agenda?
It is. Yeah, it's an item on our senior leadership board. We're actually in the process of refreshing our mental wellbeing strategy, because there are a lot of learnings, as people have already said, coming out of the last 18 months. We're moving into, there are different challenges that we're facing now. People coming back into workplaces who haven't been in the workplace for quite some time. That is, for many people, very, very stressful and different. We're moving into a place where we have hybrid working. It's harder to tell how your colleagues are, I find it much harder to judge how my colleagues are doing when I'm over Zoom rather than face to face. And I think there are also going to be challenges going forward where you have some people in a room together and other people working remotely. And how do you make sure that your team is thriving in those different ways of working? So I think there's a lot for us to learn going forwards. But the really, and another thing is about helping young people come into the workplace. I mean, these different transitions in people's lives from school to university or into the world of work, as you get to different stages in your career and promoted, all of these challenges, you need to adjust if you're going to continue to thrive.
And of course, I think it's going to be a bottom up and a top down approach, because as the younger generation come in, they are far more alive to these issues and will presumably ask more of their employers.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right, Hetty. It's really interesting being involved. I'm involved in recruitment of our graduates coming in, and it's wonderful. People are really open about asking questions about well-being in the workplace. What do you have in place in order to support people? Very interested about, they're incredibly interested and ask lots of questions about diversity and inclusion, very interested in sustainability. So we've got a fantastic generation of people coming up who these things really matter. And so it is critical for businesses to really think about these issues, embed good strategies in the ways of working, because otherwise you won't attract the talent or you won't keep people. And also our clients are really interested. We have a lot of clients who really want to know and to work together in order to take some of the unnecessary stress out of working. I mean, there will always be stress. Some stress can be good. I mean, I need a little bit of stress from time to time to perform at my best, but it's that ability then to step back and not keep going up like this, as Lynda was saying, but be able to, have that stressful period and then be able to, just find a way back out of it. I think of it like being an athlete and training, to perform over time and when you really need to.
I totally agree. I think I was actually going to ask a question that's actually also been raised in the Q&A, which is along that relationship with your clients. As a former city lawyer myself, what can be done? You talking about mental health with your clients, but when it comes to the actual day-to-day, do you think that the businesses like yours will be in a position to say, well, actually, do you really need that work tomorrow morning, which will involve our lawyers working overnight? Or do you really need them to work the weekend? Or actually, can we push back and say, we'll give it to you midweek next week? Do you think you can bring mental health into that conversation with your clients in their demands?
You can, and you can. It's not always easy. I mean, there are times when there genuinely, is an emergency and things are necessary, but that's not always the case. There is something called the Mindful Business Charter, which is a set of just some really, basic, common sense really, in the ways that businesses can work with each other. And a lot of businesses in the UK are signed up to the Mindful Business Charter. And that is a really great framework for being able to have those conversations between, say, a law firm and their client. I really commend that to businesses to look at, because it then gives you language, if you like, to talk to your client about it. So we have clients where, in our relationship meetings, that is on the agenda, the Mindful Business Charter, how's it working? You know, is it working? What feedback do we have for each other? And it's about taking the unnecessary stress out of that working relationship. As I say, you know, we're dealing with, you know, massive issues that are incredibly important. There will be stress and there will be deadlines and all the rest. But you're right, there are times when, no, you don't need to do it on a Friday night. Monday or Tuesday would be fine. And those conversations I normally find, you know, absolutely you can have them. You just need the confidence to have them with clients. That can be harder for more junior people. It can be harder. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And David, your experience as a mediator and now solely focusing on workplace mediation, and in particular resolving issues with people issues in business, where the parties need to maintain a working relationship. What have your experiences of mental health issues in resolving workplace disputes taught you?
Well, you know, as you can see, I've spent over 30 years in the workplace, and it was great to hear the Lord Mayor talking so refreshingly about mental health and storytelling. And in the spirit of that, I will share with everyone that I was a corporate executive, and I stayed on the hamster wheel for too long. And in the end, I fell off, and I had to take time off because of stress in the workplace. So, and as a result of that, I decided that when I went back to work, I would no longer do email or social media stuff after 7 in the evening, and I religiously stick to that. And I've been successful in business since, so it is possible. So I would say that at the point when I am undertaking workplace mediations, I am typically brought in right at the end where the relationship has totally broken down. So there's a point here about please to the employers, address the issues as early as you can. This is the early intervention point that William was making. You know, I had directors of a city firm that were sitting in adjoining offices. They weren't speaking, they were communicating only via email, and all the emails were in block capitals and color coded, but they weren't speaking. So at that point, what I'm finding is test and professional people, you know, their weapons are the words they use. So they lie awake at night. They're not sleeping, they're lying awake at night, and they're working out what fantastic argument can they craft. And then they share that with me when they meet with me. So early intervention clearly is very important there. There's something here about the role of the line manager. So if you look at the ACAS guidance on how to operate well in the workplace for employers, it typically is saying do it all through the line manager, as you know, it's the default position. But of course, when employees become stressed at work, quite often it's the line manager that's putting the pressure on them and driving the stress, and they associate the line manager with the cause of their stress. So there's something here I think that employers need to, I think, be more sensitive about and think about how they can recognize that and address that situation when that's arising. HR, I think, are often in a very difficult place because, you know, I've been an HR director. My primary, I will say this, my primary concern was to protect the employer's interests. And of course, I had an employee well-being role as well, but my primary role I saw it as protecting the employer's interests. And I think when employees are raising concerns and they're getting into the zone of whether they're being stressed and they have mental health issues, then I think quite often HR feel the only thing they can do is to say to that employee, you need to raise a grievance. And there'll be an investigation. And of course, what do most grievance policies say? They say, first thing is to speak to your line manager. So the second thing about that is that grievances typically, they either uphold the grievance or they reject it. So it's all or nothing. And that can be very dispiriting and very bad for the employment relationship when the employee does not get the result they want out of the grievance investigation. What I find is, I would say almost all breakdowns in relationship or disputes, even when the parties are incredibly stressed in the workplace, can actually be resolved. And typically out of the starting point of the parties not speaking to each other at all, after the intervention that I run with them, we agree a basis that they can work together. They don't re-establish trust on day one, they have to rebuild that over time. But it is perfectly possible, I think, to resolve issues in a much more flexible way than maybe, for example, taking employees down the grievance route. So those would probably be the main points that I would make to you, Hetty.
Okay.
See, David, I just agree so much with what you said. And the other thing is, which I was just going to jump in on, is, and this is for our, I look at us on the call, it's probably more for our generation, but if the younger generation could do it, I think they learn a lot. When you get an email, step back and actually, do you know what? Pick up the telephone and have a conversation. And I do it all the time. I never reply to an email where, because email, I remind people there is no emotion. And that emotion you can detect so much over the phone or having a face-to-face conversation. And that is part of the resolution that is needed, rather than getting yourself stressed about an email. And as David, I think David, you're so right. I had one last night, and we will wake up at 3 a.m. with ideas and our minds whirling away. And it was because I'd had an email overnight, and I've phoned that person this morning rather than reply to the email. But, I just think that's something that the younger generation can learn.
Yes, excellent point. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also open plan offices haven't helped, because I know as a junior lawyer, knowing that my line manager was sitting next to me listening to what I was saying, or they probably weren't listening, but it felt like they might be, I think is nerve-wracking. So it's so much easier to reply on email and nobody listened to you, instructing counsel or seeking advice or whatever it was. So I think it is, open plan office do make that a bit harder, the picking up the phone thing. So we've had a question, Susan, about strategies, and actually I was going to come back to the practical strategies. What would you recommend for keeping a team thriving as we move into a hybrid working environment? What have you seen has worked in your strategies for mental health, and what hasn't worked?
So relationships, really critical. So we work in teams. So one of the challenges of all being remote was keeping that connection, and recognizing that some people could be quite isolated. We had some of our young people who maybe were living in flat shares. That was pretty challenging, and then individuals living alone. So I think one of the things is rebuilding those relationships, but people do want more flexibility, which is great. I mean, one of my key 3 business plans going back to the beginning of 2020 was to properly embed agile working in our business. By April, we had done that, big tick. But I think much more challenging is it's fantastic when everybody is out, because then we are all sort of equal. But when you've got some people, as I say, in a room together and other people, that is harder. So one of the things I think does work well is if people are able to come in on a day together, maybe once a week or once a fortnight or whatever it works for the business. I think that physical being together is incredibly valuable in terms of creating those bonds and relationships. There is something about being 3D together, which is critical. I think that then helps to maintain those relationships when you're working differently. But some just really basic stuff around meetings when some people are in the room and others aren't. One thing I think makes a real difference is if everybody's invited to speak very early on in a meeting, so everybody's got their voices into the room. I think chairing a meeting when you've got some people in the room and others not is a different skill set. I think it's really important to make people feel included by intentionally seeking input from people who are not in the room. I have seen times when the conversation just sort of focuses on the people who are in the room and the others start feeling you know, actually, I'm not part of all of this. So that feeling of intentional inclusion and trying it, and then just constantly being honest and asking for feedback, creating a culture where, you know, you're really, is this working, is it not? One of the things I think is really important, we've discovered and learned, is about being really clear with people. We're going to do this and we're going to try it for a period of time. I found that people really want that clarity about, you know, is this for, you know, we are expecting people to try and come in X amount of time. Well, is this forever, or is this just for a period of time? So that real clarity with people gives more confidence. So that is really important, I think, to give reassurance. We're going to give this a go. We're then going to pause. We're going to seek feedback. We can then make changes. I think that gives everybody a lot more a sense of what's going on, and a bit. It's about a bit of control, I think, Hetty. It's about feeling you've got a bit of control about, you know, what you're doing, when, where, how. So those are some of the things. But we're all learning. You know, we've just been through the most, you know, extraordinary period of time, massive experiment. In many ways, and there's some good things that come out of it that we need to hang on to, and then there's some things that we definitely need to ditch. So those are just a few sort of practical thoughts.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And I work separately from my team as well, and you know, I just feel absolutely agree that going up to see them, they're up in Northamptonshire, to sit with them and be with them is hugely beneficial for all of us. Lynda, do you have particular strategies that you advise the businesses, that you advise and the individuals to use it to combat these issues or to help?
I do. I agree with everything that Susan said. I've witnessed it myself, that I was chairing a meeting. I was streaming in. One of the board members was streaming in. The rest of the board were in the boardroom. And literally the board member streaming in became invisible. And I worked so hard for her not to become invisible, but she did. So I think it's very important, either for important meetings, either everyone is remote or everyone is in the office, so that it's a level playing field. But the thing that really worries me with my clients is the business leaders, the team managers. They almost feel they've got to be some kind of pseudo psychologist. And that is not fair. It is not fair on them, and it's not fair on the people who are struggling. And it's just too much to expect of them. Yes, the business leaders need to have compassion. They need to have empathy, and they need to have a listening ear, but they don't need to think they've got to fix it, because they can't. They're not equipped to. They've got a business to run. That is where their talents are, and that is what they need to do. So I do advise that they get somebody from HR, or if the business is too small, they haven't got an HR department, they actually get somebody in who's a counsellor, who their people can go and talk to if they wish, so that you're getting expert professional help with people, and you're showing great responsibility and care for your people. I think that's really key. And if you are, as Susan says, about encouraging a thriving working environment, which is absolutely the best way of thinking of it, then it's also about celebration, celebrating the wins, no matter how small, actually saying well done. And if somebody doesn't want a big fanfare, a pat on the back is enough, or an elbow touch, whatever you're doing, but helping people feel that they are listened to, heard, significant, relevant. That is really important. And I think also we need to get to know our direct reports better than we do, because then we can tell if there's something the matter. Because sometimes all you notice is that somebody's acting slightly differently, and therefore you can say, hey, you all right? Is there something I can help you with? Do you want to chat? Do you want to go for a walk? Something. But if you don't know people well enough, you won't see that change in their behavior. So that is a key. So you don't necessarily need to know the signs of this and the signs for that. Just look for any changes that are different from their normal. So that's what I've noticed.
Hetty, may I just build on what Lynda's just said, because I totally agree. What's really important for leaders, business leaders, is to be able to notice when something may not be right, and then to know what support is available, so that they can signpost people to the professional support that might be available. I think that's really critical. And on counselling, we're a big organisation. We're able to have a counsellor. That's a fantastic facility. One of the things that we did that made a massive difference was about 8 years ago, we had a counsellor, but she was off-site. So people had to, walk 10 minutes away from the office to go and see her. And we decided to bring her on-site in a slightly, separate bit of the building where people could go without being spotted. And also people could self-refer. You didn't have to ask anyone to go and see. You just had to make an appointment to go and see Melissa. And that was transformational. It was so interesting. And what we found was that a lot of people went, I was quite worried. So many people were needing to go to see Melissa. But what was brilliant about it was issues, people felt comfortable to go, and therefore issues were picked up much and dealt with and helped much more quickly. And so they didn't become more serious and more extreme. So that was just a really practical, on-site, easy to get to, don't have to seek consent from anybody to go and see the counsellor. I mean, if you're in an organisation that's able to have that sort of facility, I can't recommend it highly enough.
Hetty, sadly I need to go, but fascinating conversation, and thank you everyone for letting me contribute. And Hetty, see you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time and for your thoughts. Thank you very much. I think that's really important about the counsellor, because I think large firms historically have always provided, well, they haven't always, but when I was working, there was a dentist and there was a beautician, and I think and a health person and a gym and things. But we to bring the counsellor in to look after our mental health as well as our teeth and our physical health is all a really good idea. And I had an experience where I did ask for help because I was feeling stressed, and nothing was done about it. Yeah, and I think that is really bad. I think if somebody asks for help, they've got to be, as you say, business leaders have got to know where to signpost people and have the resources available, or the to show people the way. What about when things don't go so well and you end up with somebody going off sick with mental health? And I know that David, you believe that there might be a different way of managing mental health absence, because I think that is the next thing that perhaps businesses are going to have to look to do better in, because I think the stats are is that once somebody's gone off sick for more than 2 weeks, it's very unlikely they're going to come back into the workplace. So David, I wondered if you'd like to share your thoughts with us.
Yes, I think you're right. I think there's several issues driving that, and of course we know that over 300,000 people a year are exited from companies in the UK because of mental health reasons. So I think the suggestion that we're making from IPOS is that where there are situations where an individual has gone off and they're now off because of mental health issues, and there has been the suggestion that it's the workplace that's caused the stress, then I think there's an argument for using mediation to deal with that, rather than taking the employee down the grievance route. Because as I said earlier, it tends to have to produce a winner and a loser in the grievance route. And the longer that goes on, the more likely, Susan will have to close her ears for a moment while I say this, but it's more likely that the lawyers get involved, and that can make it more complex, but it can also really lengthen the absence. So what we're suggesting is that we could use mediation in a very flexible way. So the start of that would be the mediator talking to the employee and agreeing the basis on which the employee would talk to the mediator. They don't have to talk to the employer at all at that point. They can talk to the mediator. It might be in 15-minute bursts. It can be over the phone. It can be in McDonald's, whatever works for the employee. The great advantage for HR in this process would be they would be in the room, if you like, in the virtual room. So they can represent the company. And quite often HR have a problem with workplace mediation with an external mediator being brought in because of the confidentiality. If HR is not in the room, they don't know what's being said, and they're frankly suspicious of the process. So if HR can represent the company or the organization here, then I think they would feel better about that. So the idea would be then that the mediator can explore with the employee what, are the practical workplace issues that have been contributing to the stress, what might work in terms of resolving those. Now, I'm assuming they've got counselling and other medical treatments going on in parallel. That's not for the mediator. We're just dealing with the very practical issues. And when then the employee feels ready, then we can open up the dialogue, we can have more of an exchange of views, and that can produce a win-win outcome. As I said to you before, in all of the mediations that I do, I would regard them as being a win-win. There's something that helps each party in the discussion rather than one winning and one losing. So this is about a much more flexible approach, and my contention would be that probably can bring employees back to work much earlier. It can actually bring the employee back into the workplace where they're not feeling that their employment relationship is damaged, where they're actually feeling good about their employer because the employer has actually taken this course of action with them. So I think there's a whole host of benefits. And the last one I would, of course, mention is that mediation provides the legal protection umbrella for the employer. So if there's a subsequent breakdown in the relationship a year later or 6 months later, no employment tribunal is going to look badly on the employer because they undertook a mediation. So, there's several wins for the employer here, but there's a big win for the employee. And hopefully less employees would end up then having to leave the workplace because they've been off with mental health issues.
Yeah, really, really interesting approach. And I don't know whether, Susan, you have any thoughts on that management of sort of mental health absence, or anything that you've done that I mean, hopefully you don't get to that point. Hopefully your thriving workplace means that people aren't going off sick with stress. But have you had any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, so the aim is very much to, I'm so much more interested in the preventative piece. So,
Yeah.
So that you avoid, that individual human distress and the impact for the individual and of course for the business and the team. But, it does happen, and being able to have a good approach to really enable the individual to get well, and then to have an agreed good return to the workplace that really gives the individual the flexibility and the approach that they need. That's absolutely critical. And I do really think it can be achieved, but it's really important to be able to create that sense of trust and support for the individual concerned, in order to help somebody to come back into the workplace after a time of absence. It's really challenging for somebody to do. So I think that's anything that avoids a situation of conflict has to be right. So I think Lynda wants to build on that.
You're on mute.
I'm such a professional. Sorry, guys. In my experience, sometimes people don't go back to work because they feel out of the loop. So even when they're better, they don't feel that they now feel an outsider because they've missed the office gossip or whatever else is going on. So it seems to be a good idea to invite that person to come into the office for an hour once a week to catch up, to have a chat, have a cup of coffee, and let them feel that they can keep up with the office gossip and everything else that's going on, which is important with the community. However, what one has to be very careful of is that the other people who work in the office understand how to handle this. Because sometimes those people feel they're treading on eggshells because they're not sure what to say. They're not sure how to handle this person who's been poorly. So there is an element needed for everybody in the workforce to understand exactly how to speak to their colleagues when they're unwell, and to, again, not to feel they've got to be a pseudo-psychologist, not to take on the responsibility, but equally to have compassion for that person, be able to talk to them in a normal way.
And that goes to the whole conversation about the openness and the more we talk about it, the better we will get about talking about it. I think that's really important. And I mean, time is running short, and of course, if anybody has any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. But I had one question to ask you, Susan, about this is all happening here in the UK, but you're a global business. How do you bring different cultures or different offices along with you on this? But actually also within your office, people have different views, and how do you bring them perhaps more cynical along with you on your journey?
You're absolutely right. It is, you know, different cultures, different perspectives, and so having a global framework, looking at you know, what you're trying to create, that good culture, good working practices, and giving tools for people to help themselves. I mean, you know, at a very high level, that's important, but then that has to be flexed in different places. So that is something it's really important to recognise. And yet you're absolutely right. There are some amazing business leaders who are able to, you know, share their own stories, who really get how important this is. But there are other people who find it more challenging. And we have one experience, for example, where something didn't go well, where we put in a wellbeing resilience program for some of our people who'd just been promoted to partner. And it didn't land well, and it was just really interesting. And the reason, I think, was that this was a group of people who were, you know, they'd just been promoted, really successful. Are you suggesting that we're not going to cope? So that's how that landed. So it was a very useful learning for us as an organisation to think, how do we position this for people going forwards? So I think, going back a little bit to the beginning, language is really important. And so helping, the way I think about it, as I say, is I often talk about the language, you know, at a business level, about language of sport and performance. That can land well, but also it's putting it in that business context. If you want your business to perform at its best, your people need to be able to perform at their best. And then also thinking about risk. And I think translating it into that business language can help business leaders to really understand why this is so critical.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I think that's a brilliant point to end on, because sadly our time is up, and I've really enjoyed our discussions today. Thank you to all the panelists, Lynda, Susan, David, for joining us and for your time today. I mean, I think this discussion could have gone on for another hour, but we must all get on with our days. So thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who has joined us. It's been great to have you here listening. Anybody who wants to follow up with questions, please do. I will circulate Lynda. I think there's a question for Lynda, perhaps. Lynda's details to when I follow up with an email and the recording, which I hope you will share with your colleagues. So thank you all very much. Have a good Friday and happy weekends. Thank you. Bye.